What's up, YouTube? We are finally back with another video. And this time we are talking about a highly controversial topic in tech. But before we get into it, go ahead and like, comment, and subscribe because you're going to get some value out of this one for sure. Um, it's been something that's been talked about, honestly, for some years now. It's a concept called tech stacking or overemployed. And essentially, this is where individuals are working multiple remote jobs or sometimes hybrid jobs, particularly in the tech space. And somebody asked me what were my thoughts about it. Somebody asked me how it works. And I figured this is a safe space for us to talk about it. Now, I do want to lead with this. I do not support it. I do not condone it. I am not telling you to do it. So if you watch this video and you get the bright idea to march down this path, please do not DM me crying about your company found out, you got let go, your life is in shambles. I'll help you find another job, but this is not advice. This is perspective, okay? So yeah, what's crazy is probably about, I was living in 2 different apartments, so maybe like 2 or 3 years ago. I was talking to a friend and he was like, yeah, I have this guy who went to school with me, and I won't even say the school. He went to college with me. He has like 4 VAs working for him. He's working 4 jobs overemployed. He pretty much has the VAs doing the work, and he just shows up for all of the face-to-face meetings. Now, this individual was in an account executive role where essentially you are selling services to somebody. So my assumption is that the VAs were handling a lot of the admin tasks behind that, and he was solely, handling conversations with each customers. Now, let's talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? The obvious pros to working multiple positions is for each job you have in tech, we could pretty much call it 6 figures, right? You're going to be anywhere from probably like 80 to 150K, give or take. So, I mean, you do the math. You're working 2 jobs at 150K. You're easily making $300,000 a year, which is a lot of money, right? Even more importantly, I think, than the money, which is what a lot of people focus on, I think is the opportunity to get additional training. The reality of it is like, depending on what job you're at and what company you work at, they're only stretching you but so thin, right? They're only teaching you what they think is best. And so sometimes going to work at another company in a different role that you're interested at, maybe entry level paying less, it allows you to work in that role for maybe a year, gain the understanding of what that role does, and go apply for more senior positions if you're interested in leaving, right? I would probably say the third benefit to being overemployed, and a reason why a lot of people say they do it, is to like achieve some goal. They want to buy a house, they want to pay off debt, they need a lot of extra money to do something for a short period of time. The things you really need to be mindful of with it is that it's not a long-term plan, right? Even with the guy who I mentioned who was working 4 jobs, you can get caught. Your employer can figure out that you are overemployed in certain scenarios. There's stories on YouTube of getting caught from like LinkedIn posts, right? Somebody posted them at like a new hire orientation, and like somebody from their other job saw it. They ended up not getting fired. The manager said he was actually smart for doing it, but like, you can get caught. The tech world is relatively small. Somebody could leave one job and go to another. I mean, there's just all these facets where you can get caught, and that's not to like scare you out of it per se, but the decisions, okay, let's talk about it like this. If I was to approach this is how I would approach it. The first thing I would have to ask myself is, am I at a company or a role that I want to be at long term? If the answer is yes to that, you have to understand that your performance is probably going to drop for a short period of time because you're working 2 jobs. The second thing I would ask myself is, if I'm not at a company in a role that I want to be in forever, am I doing this overemployment to seek a new position, like I said earlier, right? Gain training to upscale, or am I just doing it to make extra money? I would highly encourage anybody who does it to live off of your lowest stream of income, because the worst thing you could do is put yourself in a position where you're making 300K a year and you start to live like that and it's not sustainable, or you get fired from one job and now you're in a worse financial position than you were prior to going on this journey. I think the third question I would have to ask myself is, am I okay with possibly burning this bridge, right? If you are not the type of person who's already performing like an all-star performer in your role now, you taking on a second job could hinder that. And the reason why you want to think about all these things holistically is because your network is very, very important, especially in a market like this. So you want to be able to go back to any job you have ever left. Like you should hit your manager like, I need a job right now, or your former manager, and they'd be willing to hire you immediately. um but anyway, so yeah, obviously like the cons are you can get caught, you can lose your job, burnout. You're working like probably, depending on the roles, multiple jobs. But how do you approach it, right? If you're watching this video and you're like, I really need to do overemployment because of whatever personal reasons, how can I get it done? The first thing I would say is to, first and foremost, if you're coming into tech, please don't come in with the mindset of like, I'm going to break into tech, I'm going to get 4 jobs, and I'm going to be making $500,000 a year. The reality of it is like when you first get into tech, you need to spend your first 6 months, maybe even a year, just understanding the lay of the land and performing well. Because if you are not at least meeting like a certain standard, you could risk getting fired, right? So you need to come in and understand the organization, understand the ebbs and flows, make a name for yourself. I think the second piece is, thinking about the types of roles that work well in an overemployment situation. The beautiful thing about the tech space is like it's typically a task-based space. Nobody's, clocking you if you're working 8 hours a day. But the reality is most people are high performers, so they work more than that typically. It just depends on the role of the company and personal appetite. But if you were trying to do overemployment, I would say go into a role that isn't so meeting based heavy, like being in a bunch of meetings, because then you're going to have to like, depending on the company culture, you might have to have your camera on. It's hard to be in 2 meetings at once with your camera on, probably. I feel like you need to be in a role that like has a little bit of meetings and a lot of heads down time, because then you can work on it whenever. So roles like manual QA testing is perfect, because typically there's a cadence that if you're testing an application, the software has to get deployed, and then you test after it. You have a certain amount of days to test it and report all the bugs, and it just continues on a cyclical pattern, or a cycle, if you will. Software development would probably be another good one, because it's just heads down coding time. You have a few meetings in the morning, and that's about it. Business analyst roles could be another one. UX UI, pretty much any entry level position where it is not heavily meeting focused. I think the second thing to take in consideration is the time zones and industries. I think the best setup is like the person who told me they have 4 jobs. The best setup is when there's multiple time zones. And this is because typically in tech, most people have similar cadences. We have what's called a daily scrum, which is where teams get together, they talk about what's going well, what's not, if there's any blockers, and you go attack the day. That usually happens in the morning time, anywhere between like 9 to like 12 p.m., depending on the culture. And so if you're in different time zones, you could wake up, start your East Coast position, at 9 a.m., and then get some work done, make some progress. And then by 12 p.m., when the West Coast is waking up, you can switch jobs or switch roles to cater to that. There's been scenarios, obviously, where like a lot of people in tech are working with offshore teams also. And that opens up the opportunity for you to split up when you're working, because one job could be primarily, from the hours of 7 to 3. And then the other job could be, handled in an overlapping time, maybe from like 12 to 8. So that way you're not working like all day and there's some overlap to it. But yeah, I would say like the biggest piece of advice is to probably make sure that you're not also applying for positions within the same like industry or like competitors, meaning like if you were to go work at Walmart, applying for Target is probably a red flag, because that is like a conflict of interest, right? If you're working for Walmart, try to go and work for, I don't even know what company doesn't deal with Walmart, maybe like banking or something, I don't know. Make sure that they're not a client. If you go do banking, make sure that they're not a client of Walmart. Your biggest goal is to make sure that like you're not overlapping industries. But overall, I feel like it's a smart idea for a short period of time if you're really in a crunch. I don't think it's necessarily worth like making a bad name for yourself. I think the goal is to gain the skill sets to grow in tech to where like your base salary is comfortable enough for you to just work one job. There's an infinite pay skill in tech. If you pay the price, you learn the skills, you learn the organization, and you know maneuver through your career effectively. There's no reason why at 5 years you can't be at 150K base if you're just being intentional and playing your cards right. Like it's possible. There's no reason why like, at the 10-year mark you're not at like 200 plus, and that's just base. We're not talking about bonus incentives. We're not talking about annual awards. We're not talking about any outliers like performance based things, whatever. But yeah, man, that's the concept of tech stack. And let me know y'all thoughts. Would you do it? Are you doing it? I do have one friend who actually was able to pull this off with two hybrid positions. They required her to be on site like 2 days out of the week, and she would go on site. And I don't know how people do that. That's just crazy to me. But she was able to like pay off a lot of debt, save up 100K, and move out of the state. So shout out to her. Let me know y'all thoughts on it. I'm curious to see. Do not start tech stacking because you watched this video. Do it because you already had it in your brain, because that was not the intent at all. But yeah, let me know what else y'all want to see, and we're out. See y'all in the next video.